glass. I think if the team, the group, our participants are like the sun, their brilliance is going all different directions. The facilitator is like the magnifying glass, and we help focus their energy in one particular spot so that we set fire to success. So really the first 20% or a pre-workshop is to figure out what is the MVC, what is the most valuable challenge. You don't want to overthink things, but you also don't want to underthink things. It's very important to optimally think through a challenge. And what I love about workshops is workshops, when done right, help us optimally think through things.
Welcome to another day, another workshop, your favorite podcast about workshop facilitation. My guest today is an amazing facilitator, a true creative mind, and a TEDx speaker. Leake has been facilitating workshops with executive teams for over 15 years. Before that, he built a career in advertising, starting as a copywriter, then becoming a creative director, and later joining a leadership team at one of the largest ad agencies in the US. He brings a powerful mix of skills, creativity, executive leadership, and a deep facilitation experience. In today's episode, we're going to talk about what he calls a high ROI workshop. We will share plenty of tips, stories, and ideas to level up your game. So without further ado, let's welcome Tim.
Hi, Mehdi. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited, Tim, because I've been following you for a couple of months. There was this huge post that you made about the iceberg. And then I was like, who is this guy? And then I saw that you were talking about high ROI workshop. I've never seen a creative before talking about ROI and business terms. So you got my attention.
Aim to bring creativity and fun to the business stuff. So that's my goal.
I love that. I've seen that on your website. But before you go right away into the core stuff and workshop, of course, do you want to tell our audience something else about you?
I think you did a pretty good job there. I maybe the one thing I'll just lob in that got me started on facilitation specifically is after I was at the time a creative director at an ad agency in New York City, and I got involved with a Swedish company called 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗁 that uses facilitation to create learning experiences. And it's just a fantastic organization. And I am grateful to them and owe them a lot as far as that journey. So I ended up working with them on a freelance basis for probably a decade. And then I worked full-time for 2 years as well. And really got to be part of a lot of amazing transformations, helping companies change and adapt to be better prepared for the future. So that's where I got the bug for facilitation. And then as I moved into my executive role at the advertising agency, I still worked with them on the side for quite a number of those years, as well as then applying facilitation internally and as part of that executive team. So that's kind of, I think, how I got good at doing this with leadership teams specifically, because every workshop that I did ended up being kind of with senior vice presidents and above, and they're a challenging group. they're a challenging group to get to pay attention, and they have strong opinions, and
the time is precious.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? It's hard to get them for a long amount of time and to get them to pay attention. So that's, and yet I actually think that's where facilitation can bring the most value, because I often like to say, I think of a metaphor, you might have seen me share this one on LinkedIn as well, is another metaphor besides the iceberg, is that of a magnifying glass. I think of if the team, the group, our participants are like the sun, their brilliance is going all different directions. The facilitator is like the magnifying glass, and we help focus their energy in one particular spot so that we set fire to success. I don't know what we set fire to. We set fire to results, success, energy, whatever, momentum. But you achieve the result that we're going for. Whereas, if a fire is what you want, that's the result. the sun, as bright as it is, will only kind of give us a light sunburn without that focus, because people are distracted and that energy goes all different directions.
Oh, I love the way you started, because like focus is such, like, we hear about it, but it's so hard to have focus. Like,
Yeah.
I was listening to another podcast and they were mentioning that priority is coming from Latin, and usually from before it used to mean like one thing.
Yeah.
And now it's funny because it become like priorities, and then you have a list that is super long. Like I really liked the image you used. And how do you help like companies or those leadership team to have a focus like it really, like we really mean it? Like, how do you work that magic?
Well, so I call the approach that I use generally, you said this in the introduction, I call it a high ROI workshop. And so just to start there for a second, because I specifically use those words because leadership teams care about the return on investment is what ROI stands for. And almost, especially at a leadership level, they're looking for what is the ROI of this. And a challenge that a lot of facilitators have and that workshops have is that we go through them, and as you say, we focus on too many priorities. So we end up trying to solve a lot of things in a single workshop. And we don't really end up solving them. We just kind of lightly brush a lot of different things. So therefore you don't have an ROI. We just had, okay, that was an interesting exploration, but it doesn't result in demonstrable progress towards their goal in the end. And that gives workshops a bad name. That gives facilitation, it makes it difficult for us to prove the ROI that we bring and the value we bring. So we're not able to sell as much. We're not able to deliver as much. We're not able to get the attention of those leadership teams the same way. And that's not good. Like, it's bad all across the board. When I come to do a high ROI workshop, I think ultimately there's 3 keys to making that work. And the first one is the answer to the question you just asked me, which is what's the magic of getting them to whittle down those priorities? And it is a mandatory thing. I call it the MVC. And so it sounds kind of like a minimum viable product, or the most valuable person, or most valuable player. There's a lot of things that it kind of sounds like. And what I mean by it is the most valuable challenge. And workshops are built around solving challenges. But what is the most valuable of those challenges, of all the possible things we could solve? When we figure that out, the whole value of the workshop gets better. Because imagine we're trying to, let's just say that to adequately solve the appropriate amount of time to solve a significant problem is a full day workshop. Let's just pretend that's the case. It might be more, it might be less. I sometimes think you really need 2 full days to really appropriately think through what we're trying to do. But some challenges you could solve shorter or whatever. But now, as soon as you have that one problem, and as soon as you add one more thing to it, you have half the amount of time. Now we have 4 hours instead of 8 hours to solve the problem. So immediately it breaks. Immediately it's impossible to solve that challenge. And if you add 4 things to the workshop agenda, now it's worthless. There's almost nothing that can be solved. You can just sort of lightly skate by it. And I have been part of so many workshops, and I have facilitated so many workshops where we had a list of priorities. Does not work. You have to start with it. I shouldn't say it doesn't work. It works if the whole point is to discuss it. But if the point is to try to solve it and have lasting impact, then we want a different approach. So really the first 20% or a pre-workshop is to figure out what is the MVC, what is the most valuable challenge. The approach that I like to use on this isn't just ideation around it, because there's a lot of approaches that you can use to come up with ideas of what might those things be. But we want to keep laddering up to Like, what is the thing that if we solve this, it actually solves a lot of other challenges. It results in the most revenue or profit coming in as a result of it. It saves the most time, all of those kinds of things. And so ideating around it is one part of that process. But then the other part is actively putting a value onto it. And I've got this approach that I like to use that I call the value score, which is basically it's a 3-part score of how do we weight the value of this challenge. And the one with the highest value is the one we should focus on. And that value score is made up of, first and foremost, kind of like an estimate of how much do we think that this is emotionally going to help the group. Like, emotionally, does it help our spirit? Are we going to enjoy life better? Is it something we'll be excited to solve? Because if we're excited to solve it, we're going to spend time solving it. Like, it's going to be valuable to it. If it's going to help the culture, or if it's going to help our people be more energized or engaged, that's valuable. All of that is valuable. The second one is what we call the ecosystem score, which is how much does it help solve other aspects of things. And like a go-to example I like to use for this one is a lot of times people will say want to do a workshop where we figure out how to solve burnout in our team. Like, our team is just burnt out. They're overworked and they're exhausted. How can we solve that? But interestingly, if actually what you tried to solve wasn't burnout, but you tried to solve increasing, or let's say doubling profit margin, which is ambitious, right? The doubling profit margin is ambitious. But even if you aim really high and fail, you'll still probably significantly improve profit margin. And if you improve profit margin, not revenue, but the profit, it means we can hire more people. We can pay the people we've got what they're worth. And those two things alone solve burnout. Otherwise, you're trying to solve burnout with Band-Aids. Like, how do we do more happy hours so people feel happy? Or how do we work more efficiently, which is just actually adding bureaucracy and structure to a challenge? You're solving a symptom, not the most valuable thing. And so obviously profit margin is always going to be a very big thing to solve. That's not always the right thing for people to solve, but it's in a place where if you start to solve for that, it fixes a lot of other stuff. And then the third aspect then is putting a monetary score on it. And I like to make a guess of over the next 3 years, we're trying to estimate what is the value of solving this problem. And we put a score on that, just whatever people think. There's a refined process for evaluating this. Essentially, all of us is smarter than any one of us when it comes to estimating how this works. And so you use a process where we put in, everybody makes a guess, and the average of that guess tends to be much closer to reality than any one person's estimation. And then when we take that, go ahead.
So what you do is, like, to define the MVC, you're looking at 3 dimensions. The first one is like, how excited is the team about the challenge? The second one is the ecosystem. And the third one is like trying to give a value of what is the challenge we are trying to solve, so that it gives like all the elements to the team to see, okay, this makes sense that we spend our time on this.
Exactly.
Correct?
So, and that's an evaluation of the idea, essentially. So we've got all these different ideas, and when we start to put a valuation on that, now we can see, okay, if we solve this idea, that idea might be worth $30 million to solve. Often it is in the multiple millions of dollars. If you're working with a big company and you're solving something significant, it's valuable. And it would have a high impact on our ecosystem and a really high impact on our emotionally if we were able to solve that. When you identify that, a caveat I say is, just because we say that it's worthy, like we could potentially, this would be worth $30 million over the next 3 years, that doesn't mean that whatever we solve in the workshop will necessarily do that. So I like to actually imagine failure. imagine that we aim for that, but we only get 20% of the way there. Like that we're 80% failure. That would still be, so if it's 20% of a $30 million thing, that's still $6 million as a failed solution. That's still very valuable. Now, is that worth us spending a significant amount of focused time over the next week together on, so that we're not distracted? Are we energized around that? When you have that idea, now the executive team locks in and they're focused. If we're trying to solve how do we make people happier, that might not be what half this group thinks is really important. It might just be what the workshop was about or whatever. People start to go, well, they should just be happy for having a job, or like we're focused on the wrong stuff when we do that. And that's what I think is really, really powerful about this idea of defining the MVC, is once you do that, it also solves the problem we have of getting leaders to commit to the time. I had a call this morning with a client where they're trying to get the section of the workshop where the leaders are there. It was originally a full day, and then it was a half day, or it goes to 1 o'clock. And now they're trying to move it from 9 to noon. And it's like, so now we've got 3 hours with the leadership team, and we'll have to have a break. So it's really 2.5 hours. What are we going to be able to accomplish? We could barely get through like an opening exercise in that time, and much less properly solve this. And this is a big challenge that I think independent facilitators, I'm sure you've had this, it's hard to get leadership teams to stay focused and all focus on the one problem. And by putting the MVC first, it solves all that. So that's the magic. To loop all the way back to the one question you've had time to ask me so far. That's the answer.
So I love that. I love that the concept of the MVC. But then I have a couple of questions. So myself, I think I worked like 2 or 3 times with like a board. Actually, I mean, in a workshop setup. And I don't want to go into cliche, but those guys are really analytical. They know their figures. They know their company. When you come with a concept like this, like let's estimate like the challenge, and you do it with the group, like how are they not like skeptical about the approach? Like how do you manage that if it's the case?
My favorite way to manage that skepticism that comes in when people are like, well, this is just a workshop, is to acknowledge it's just a workshop. That doesn't make it bad. Most of the time, we're pretty close. And so if we're estimating the value of a challenge, yeah, it's just a guess. This is a workshop, right? That's where we're at. But most of the time, if they went and ran the numbers on that later on, we'd probably have been pretty close. Let's pretend we estimated it's going to make the company $30 million over the next 3 years, and we were off. It's $26 million or it's $36 million. Were we really off? I mean, it doesn't really matter, because what we're talking about is a concept that we're trying to solve. And it's it's like when we put together sales estimates, it's based on real facts and figures, but it's at the end of the day, it's an estimate. It's a guess. And that's fine, because we agree that it's an estimate and it's a guess, but we're probably not wrong. That's one aspect of it. Also, it's baked into the methodology that we use to make that estimation. And there's actually a lot of proven science behind this, and I'm not Mr. Proven Science guy. So, but there is a lot of proven science behind this approach. And one of them, basically, there's this study, you know, those games, you see them a lot at carnivals or sometimes in stores, and they've got a jar full of jelly beans, and they ask people to guess how many jelly beans are in this jar. And it's very difficult to know. No, we always do this, like I count them and I multiply it by some magic number in my head. I don't know how to estimate that. You don't know how to estimate that. But for whatever reason, when you get a group, and it doesn't have to be a big group either, you get 10 people and we all make a guess of how many jelly beans are in this jar, the average of our guesses, not influenced by, this is important, it can't be influenced by other people. But the average of that tends to be more accurate than any one person's estimate is. And so that's scientifically proven. And it doesn't work if, say, we start off and I go, like, my guess is I think there's probably 2,000 jelly beans in here. Mehdi, what do you think? That doesn't work. I've now anchored it with what
Yeah,
I think.
definitely I
It
created
has to
bias.
be blank. And there's a hive mind approach that as a group, we are smarter than the individual is when it comes to estimating these things.
Yeah.
So that's another way. Like, there is science that backs that up. But the point is to have an estimate of that we agree upon, and then we move forward. If the group said at the get-go, I think you're wrong, I think this estimation is way off, and I've got facts and figures to fight it, we're going to have that conversation. The group usually agrees on what it is.
Yeah.
So that's part of the process.
But I get it. I think and at the end of the day, what is important is like compare the challenges between each other and see like,
Yes.
okay, does it really make sense that it's the biggest one and that it makes sense that we spend time on it? But just like the skepticism, like, oh, maybe it's worth, like, maybe Tim, what you could do before the session is like try to do those information, like do a kind of a study or research, and then like come to us with what you believe is the MVC, and then we start working right away.
I think there's a couple of reasons that kind of approach is hard of us as a facilitator doing the research in advance and bringing it. For one, we've changed our role from being a facilitator to being a consultant.
Definitely.
And so that's something simply to be aware of. I do a lot of work where I kind of have a consultant hat on over here and then a facilitator hat on over here, but it changes the nature of the engagement. One of the reasons I love facilitation is that we are not the expert. It is very unlikely that I'm going to go into a leadership team at some giant company and know as much as they know about what their big challenges are. Just highly unlikely that I'm going to come in. But as a facilitator, I can present ways of thinking and ways of looking at the problem that they might not have thought of, and then they're going to bring that. But that said, what you mentioned about doing it in advance, I actually think is very powerful. I often like to do this as a pre-workshop, so that it is something that we've thought about in advance. And then once we've established that, we then create the design for how are we going to solve for this later on.
Yeah, because my thought was like, since it's so hard to get those people together for a time, can we not find ways to define the MVC like differently before, so that the only 4 hours we have or the full day is actually focused on working on the MVC?
Yeah, I think they're important for being part of that conversation, though. So
yeah,
if we came in as facilitators, even if I've seen this happen, even if the CEO is the one who decided that what we're going to focus on today is doubling our profit margins, and we've asked Tim and Mehdi to come in and they're going to facilitate that, and now the group that has to solve it was not part of picking the topic, we already have disconnect. Already they are not aligned because they weren't part of that conversation of what is the most valuable challenge. They were told where the CEO ended up, and so you'll end up with built-in pushback off the get-go because we didn't tap into their brilliance. We didn't tap into the wisdom of that group to help self-define it. And I think that can be a big challenge. It's funny because a lot of the topics you're talking about it leads me to the second most important thing that I keep in mind as we do these, which is that you don't want to overthink things, but you also don't want to underthink things. It's very important to optimally think through a challenge. And what I love about workshops is workshops, when done right, help us optimally think through things. They make sure that we don't go through this process of overthinking it. The natural state of business is to overthink things. We go on and in circles, and we have meeting after meeting after meeting. But in fairness, especially when all of a sudden we're told, nope, you've only got 4 hours with this leadership team. Now we're underthinking it. And now we haven't given ourselves the appropriate amount of time to solve this problem. We can do it fast, but fast looks like 2 days, not 9 months. Fast doesn't look like 2 hours when the problem is hefty. And if you try to underthink it, what we end up with is a lot of sticky notes that were not well baked. We didn't really go through the robust process of vetting those ideas. It seemed good in the moment, but then when we go look back and look at it a week later, we're like, no, that doesn't really work for a number of reasons. And that's not helpful either. So it's important that we take the time that we need. It isn't a long time. It's reprogramming the expectation that 2 days seems like a long time for an executive team to think about a challenge. But is 2 days, is 5 days a long period of time? Would 2 weeks be a long period of time if it was going to result in doubling our, I'm going to go back to the same example, in doubling our profit margins? Like, that is worthy of disengaging from everything else and going heads down for a short amount of time comparatively for that value on the back end. And that's where it starts to solve a lot of our internal problems, because we want to be nice. Like, we, as facilitators, we're like, well, I understand. Okay, the leadership team is busy. Let's figure out what we can do with only 4 hours. It's just going to be worse, because now we have half the amount of time to solve the problem. It's just like what I said earlier about having 2 or 3 problems to solve. I can't solve those either in the amount of time. We can solve one problem, and we have to focus on the right thing.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the thing is that, and I've seen that a lot with like my team or the facilitator coaches. So they want to be nice. They don't want to lose the gig. So they say yes, yes, yes. And then they manage those expectations very badly. And then of course they're not going to deliver. And what's going to happen is that client's going to be pissed. They're not going to work with them again. And they just screw up and they won't have another opportunity.
Yeah.
And what I love with your approach is that since you put a number on this MVC, it's really easy then to say, hey guys, 2 days to solve a 30 million challenge, totally worth it. And then there is no discussion because it's obvious.
Right.
So that's why I like with this approach.
It solves problems we have as facilitators. It solves problems we have as marketing and selling facilitation services. And then it solves the problem of delivering on that value, because there will always be skepticism. Of course, I mean, there's going to be skepticism off the get-go of saying, well, you're talking about doubling our profit margins. If we could just do that, if it was as easy as that. There is immense creativity and knowledge and solutions in a group. It is very rare that group sits down in a structured way to try to solve a challenge that big. And that's why they never do. It's, and I even say at the beginning, it's why I go, let's imagine massive failure. Let's imagine an 80% failure rate, that we only solve 20%. That's still valuable. You could go even lower than that and make it a 5% success rate. And that's still probably that would still mean $1 million of additional revenue. That's still probably worth focusing on that problem for 2 days. And it really depends on how big. Like, I'm saying doubling profit margins being equal to $30 million over 3 years, which would mean $10 million a year. That's a small company, right? If you're going to go and do this with Coca-Cola, like, little things have a giant impact of what we could solve. And that's why it works. But so often corporate environments are not built to be able to slow down and focus on something important for just a couple days. It's weird that we feel like we can't afford that, and yet we take vacations. We'll go on vacation for 2 weeks. So why not check out for 1 week and just focus on this one challenge, this significant challenge that'll make us so much money that we could take 5 more vacations and not even sweat it.
Yeah. But again, as every facilitator, I've been fighting that because it's also like, like if you just calculate the number of meetings you had on that challenge, like you'd be surprised about that number.
Yeah.
But still, like having a day seems a lot. And it comes back to the topic, the first topic, but since for them it's a lot of time and they like, okay, if we free up our agenda for a day, we want to tackle this and that and that. And then you have this long wish list.
Yeah.
What are the tips you could give to our listeners and viewers? How do you manage from moving this wish list of like 5 or 6 topics to one topic?
It's marketing, man. It really is. It goes all the way back to marketing. How do you convince anybody to do something that they aren't already wanting to do or that they're putting up resistance about? You have to attack and change their beliefs one thing at a time. And I think stories are a great way to go. I often will push back on what you just shared. When somebody asks me that, I will often tell a story, which is that when I first joined the advertising agency, that I worked there for 10 years as part of their executive team. So I was the chief marketing and innovation officer for this agency. And as you said at the beginning, they're one of the biggest independent advertising agencies in the United States. So there are much bigger agencies, but they're like global conglomerates, and we were independent. We had about 750 people. So to give a sense of the head count wise, right? Fairly large. And as part of this executive team, because I had this background of being a facilitator and working with this Swedish company, Hyper that I mentioned earlier, the CEO said, it would be great. What we'd like to do is we'd like to get the team together and do an offsite for 2 days where we just focus on our biggest problems. And I was like, awesome. What are the problems we need to solve? Killer. These are 12 things that are going to be really important for us to dig into. I love it. We developed a plan, and we had an awesome workshop for 2 days. We probably left with 36 really brilliant, like, oh, I love that idea, and I love that idea, and I love that idea. We're going to go make these happen. At the end, we put together an action plan of how we were going to go do this and solve all these problems. And then 6 months later, we had almost zero demonstrable progress towards any of those ideas. So the workshop itself was great, but the follow-up wasn't there. So why was that? We spent 2 days on it, but we spent 2 days attacking 12 different problems, resulting in 36 different ideas. There is no way that at the end of that the executive team, once we got back to real life and all the stuff that was keeping us busy, that we were going to follow up on 36 new initiatives and really make that work. Our thinking was, oh, well, we'll have this team own this one and this team own this one. Like these all had different owners. There wasn't all 36 new things for one person. But then at the end of the day, what we did is we were passing it off to another group that was already overworked, that didn't really understand why we were doing the idea and what we had just given them. And it was one of many ideas. And then we didn't have time to follow up on all those. And so that is an example of a workshop that we thought was good, we thought was effective. It had great energy, we had great ideas, we were all rah-rah after it, but it failed. And so I tell that story to potential clients to explain, this is why we focus on one thing. This is why we spend that 2 days. Hey, if we could spend the 2 days and we could focus on 12 things, would we rather focus on 12 things that don't result in any forward movement, or would we rather focus on one thing that results in a lot of forward movement, a higher ROI result, and that has that ecosystem effect that then solves a lot of these other challenges we might have dug into and simply come up with Band-Aid solutions on? And I think that's why, like a lot of those 36 ideas, I think you can maybe say 10 of them would result back to revenue, but they were still solving symptoms because we hadn't identified the clear problem. We were like, oh, this seems important. presentation skills is a great example of one. I don't remember if that was one of the things we talked about. It probably was, because it was a big thing. How do we get better at delivering more interesting presentations to our clients? That's a valuable thing, but it's actually, it can be high, but the funny thing is like, it can also be a symptom of what it is. It's like, we're trying to solve this one thing. How do I get a bunch of people to get better at doing presentations, when the reality is we might not be solving the right problems for our clients in the first place, or we might be delivering the wrong kinds of solutions or whatever. There's I don't know, it's kind of a cliche story that people talk about in the creative advertising world, which is, if it's a great idea, I could just sketch it on a piece of white paper and marker and show it to you, and you would know it was a great idea. Versus that I need all the bells and whistles of a great presentation. And I'm a big believer in great presentations, by the way. We do also need to be compelling.
I hope
and deliver
after
that.
10 years of
yeah. I'm not diminishing that. But that said, if you're delivering a great presentation solving the wrong solution, it's still going to fail. Yeah. And I've actually been part of so many presentations in my advertising world career where we delivered great, probably the wrong solution. Yeah, although it works the opposite way too. If you come up with the right solution and you don't present it well, it also fails. So I can talk myself out of that, but I'm just using it as an example because I think it's just so easy to focus on some of the wrong things. It's easy to focus on how do we create a more fun culture for our team, for instance, but start solving it with let's form bowling teams, or let's have happy hours, or let's get ping pong tables. And we're solving the wrong thing. We didn't solve how to make the work more fun. We solved how to put fun stuff around the office. And that just actually results in actually makes things worse at the end of the day.
Yeah, because they will be happy for 1 hour and not really happy at the end. And
right.
But that's why, I'm a strong believer that after a big ideation session where you're tackling something like important and complex, you need to bring another type of activity to prioritize, because there is the trap of like, oh, we're just going to pick this idea because it's cool. There is all those biases.
Totally.
And then this is what, okay, fine. Those seems like promising. Let's take a step back and try to put a more scientific reasoning. That's why I love the magic lenses from Jake Knapp in his last book, Click, because it brings that, let's look it from different perspective.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, let's not fall into the trap of doing this idea because it sounds cool and fun to work on. Let's work on something that is more close to actually solving an MVC, for example.
Yeah, exactly. I think lenses and filters help us get to that optimal thinking that I referenced earlier. Because what we've done is we're not just like, oh, I like that idea, or it got the most dots on it, or whatever. we put it through a series of filters or magic lenses, as Jake and Jay-Z talk about in the book. We put it through that, and that helps us know what are the right questions to ask, what are the right things to look for, and to evaluate it. And it's I didn't call it a magic lens, but the scoring system that I use to evaluate the MVC in the first place is a form of that.
Yeah, you have three perspectives and you assess them through those three perspectives,
exactly.
Right?
And we guide them through so that we have optimally thought it through, as opposed to skip that step and just voted and moved along. And one more thing that I think is very valuable, another reason why I think it's just important to take the time that is needed, and it is still short compared to the alternative, but there's a thing that at Hyper Island we always called this night work, I think is how we used it. But basically, it's not homework, but what happens is we've thought about this intently, and now everybody goes home and they sleep on it. And all these connections, and people come back the next day having made connections that they weren't in a place to articulate the day before. We were tired, things were too new and too fresh. And there's a truth to that, and it's true in creativity as well, that you have a lot of ideas and then you need to go away and do something else for a little while. And we need that space to let our brain make those other connections and come back and reflect on that.
because the brain still work on those things, like, right?
Right. So
The
it's
Kelly
valuable
brothers,
to have that space.
the Kelly brothers in the creative confidence, one of them like explained that they have like a whiteboard in the shower because when your body is like relaxed, like it makes those connections.
Totally true.
So it's all of that. Like I love the idea. So I guess in your workshop you make sure that when there is big ideation, like there is a big break or even a night between them, so
or
that
you just bring showers into the workshop, and then if everybody's in the shower during the workshop, no, it turns out that approach doesn't work so well. But there's such a truth to that, right? That all the time for me, the shower is the problem with the shower is, of course, it is very different. I don't know how you use a whiteboard in the shower. I don't know in what world ADAW made that work. Clearly, like they went and figured out how to go
it's just for
solve
the
that
guy.
problem. But my whiteboard does not work in the shower. But I actually have a very similar results from exercise. So if I hop on a elliptical machine or a treadmill, or I go out for a jog, it also has to be the right length for me for whatever 45 minutes. It has to be about that long.
Nice.
Because if I just exercise for 20 minutes, I don't have the same aha moments. It somehow happens later in the cycle for me. But it works a little bit better because then I can talk. I can just record it into my watch or into my phone, and I can kind of like capture my aha moments a little bit easier. But it is amazing. If I read a book or something like that, like I just read a couple chapters of a book and then go for a jog, the amount of like ideas I have in the last 15 minutes of that, it freaks me out. Like it actually, it almost overwhelms me how many great ideas I have in that amount of time. But it works every time for me.
Actually, like, and when I've read this book, I started like I always listen to podcasts or like listening to music in my shower, and I stopped, and I was doing stand-up comedy in the time. So it was like all my punchline, I found them in the shower because of that. Right? And it's so hard to not do something else. Like you go running, I guess you have music and you have those things, and you need to also give space to you so that you can have those aha moments.
Yeah, I think it actually helps. It helps to have music that you're so familiar with. Like I like older music because it's music I've heard a million times. So it becomes energizing, but it's background. Like I actually observed this on a jog the other day. A song ended and the next song started, and I immediately had no idea what the previous song was. I was like, what was the song that just ended? I knew it, but it's just gone. It's just background. And whereas I listen to something new, it's challenging and distracting, or I think about the lyrics too much. So for me, that's a big part of that. But you're right. It can work both ways too. Like I can listen to podcasts, say, in the car, like a commute is another good opportunity for this.
Yeah.
But you have to like be willing to stop it. Like, the podcast or an audiobook, they say something like, oh my God, I just had 10 ideas. I need to be able to pause that and then pull up, like to be able to dictate my idea back. That's another good way to do that. Lots of ways that you get to these ideas fast today. But again, fast is a relative term. It doesn't work to say, like, hold the gun to my own head and say, I need an idea in 2 minutes. Like, that's not enough time. But like, I love that you were doing that for stand-up comedy, by the way. That's because you know how, and I've never done stand-up comedy, but I have done improv comedy. And what I did in the context of creative advertising is similar. Like I have this concept. So I'm imagining it's pretty close. You've got this joke, you've got the setup, and you're like, I know something's here. I know it's here, but what's the way that I land that at the end? And there are also like, there's 10 ways I could potentially do it. And like, I just know it's there. And then you go away and in the shower, you're like, oh, that's how I land that. Like that's the solution right there. It's kind of similar, I think, to stand-up comedy in a way. And then also you just need to try it in front of an audience. That's the other thing. You just have to do it and see whether they laugh, because either they laugh or they don't laugh. It doesn't matter how funny you think it is.
Exactly. You just sort of summarize like stand up in 2 minutes, but that's the way to go. And then you also feel like, I'm sorry, like we deviated and I had a creative expert in front of me. So I guess it was It was meant that we cover creativity, but
Right.
even like in stand-up, and they say in creativity, the longer you have an idea in your mind, the more you're gonna fall in love with the idea, and it's going to be very painful to not
Yeah.
leverage the idea. So this is why in stand-up you want to test fast, and this is the same right in business, because
Yeah.
otherwise you have this idea of project, and then you're gonna be so much into the project that it's gonna be hard to not do it.
Yeah.
Because you've spent all this time thinking about it with your team. I'm
And
actually a design workshop also this way.
Totally. It's all of it is very similar. And probably for at least 13 years, I've had as part of some of my workshops, I talk about as a story, and I think I use Chris Rock as the example, probably because I read this someplace, but every stand-up has the same process, I'm sure, which is, especially in the world of marketing and advertising, but it hits a lot of us, is that we want confidence before we move forward. We don't want to put anything out there in the world. We don't want to do the workshop unless I know it's going to work. And we don't want to put the marketing campaign out there unless I know it's going to work. The story, as I tell it, is like Chris Rock does not go out and write an HBO special and then perform an HBO special. Instead, he's got a lot of early ideas, and then he goes to some small comedy club that they didn't know he was coming, and he tells those jokes, and the audience either laughs or they don't laugh. And then the more he does it, he understands the timing of it, and he goes, yeah, this one routinely kills, and this one didn't land, but I still think there's something funny. So what if I do it this way? And nope, it still didn't land. And what if I do it this way? And some of them just never work. Like, we get it, and the audience just doesn't think that's funny. And I can say in improv, because improv is different, because improv, you're just making it up as you go and you don't do it the same the next time. But the whole point is to get in this realm of, I don't even know what's coming out of my mouth. I'm just in the moment. And you know it's right. And when you try really hard in improv to make it funny, nobody laughs. But when you're just truly in the moment, the audience laughs. And I'm like, what did I even do? What did I even why was that funny? Like, I don't even know why they laughed. I don't even know why that was funny. But you count on the rest of your team to back you up. And they start realizing what was funny about that. And you start repeating it and heightening it. And that's how you create a scene in an improv with an improv group. It's sort of the opposite, but you're trusting the group and the process to get you there. And somewhere in between those two things is workshops, because we go into workshops and I have to trust that the group will get us there. But also, as a facilitator, I've done this enough times that I've now learned how to explain it. I've now learned what stories land. I know the setup. I know where my beats are going to be. So I've got my stand-up routine, but I don't know what the group is going to come back with. That part is improv, and I just have to roll with it. So even this conversation, I wasn't expecting to land there, but I love that as an aha, that facilitation is actually like right in between improv on this side and stand-up on this side.
Wow.
And you have to apply both things and be comfortable in both worlds, because you'll know you'll get to the result in the end.
Wow, I love this idea. You nailed it. Okay, cool. So if we come back to the 3 keys to have amazing high-ROI workshops. So the first one is like defining the MVC. Then the second one was finding the right balance between optimal thinking, going for optimal thinking and not like overthinking something too long.
Or underthinking it.
Yeah, underthinking it. Yeah, that's the right balance. What is the third one?
So the third one comes with what a lot of times when we do workshops, it's usually the last exercise that we do is action steps. Like, what's our action plan going to be? And I've done a lot of these where it was a 3-day workshop, and now we're pretty exhausted and tired, and it is the thing we do at 4:30 from 4:30 to 5:30 on the third day, and we do an action plan. And the problem with an action plan, fundamentally, especially if you're doing this with a leadership team, and I usually am working with senior people, at least, if not the most senior people, but it's usually senior, is usually the action plan is something other people are going to need to do later on. There's a few things that are what am I going to do, but there's also I need other people involved. And so instead of doing an action plan, what we do with a high ROI workshop format is we do an alignment plan, which is, and it has to be much more than the last session of the day. It is actually 40% of the workshop is working on the alignment plan. So if we have done 20% is figuring out what the MVC is, the next 40% is coming up with the solution and how what are we going to do in order to solve that problem. The next 40% is really thinking about how do we get the whole rest of the organization aligned with what this is. Because when they're aligned, if they understand why we're doing it and they're as excited about this as we are, now we just let them go do our job. I don't have to say what a project manager needs to do next or what a creative director needs to do next or whatever needs to happen, what the sales team needs to do next. We just need to get them as on board and excited as we are about what the solution is, and then let them do their jobs, which is what great leaders are good at anyway. But if we don't really sweat the details of how we get them aligned, that's why it all falls apart. And a great way to think about it, probably because I have a marketing background, but is to think of it like a marketing plan. We need to communicate to the rest of this group not only why the solution is right, but why the problem was the right one to solve in the first place. It goes all the way back to communicating the MVC in the first place. Why was this the most valuable challenge for us to focus on? How did we decide to solve it? What does that look like? And why does that look like? I don't know if that makes sense, but like, why did we make the decision we did? And it's creating this same journey that we took and helping people understand, oh, that makes sense. What did we leave on the table? Why are we not doing this? And really pumping that group up. And what does that look like? And then, because we know this will fall apart if we let people leave, it's actually using some of the time in the workshop to create as much of that structure as possible. So a good example of where we did this, I told the story earlier about early on in my I was there for a decade in this chief marketing and innovation officer role. Early on, I had that failed one. A later on one, we were much more focused. And what we wanted to do is figure out, honestly, is advertising agencies are so commoditized. It is so hard to stand out, which ironically is what advertising agencies do for other brands. And every advertising agency has this hard problem. It's very difficult to figure out what makes us unique and different and ownable. And so we really sweated that challenge and we came up with the approach that we're like, yes, this is true to our past. It's true to our future. It's true to our now. I see why this is important to our people. I see why it's important to our clients, all of this stuff. And now we needed the other 725 people that work here that were not in this workshop to understand this as well. And what we actually did there was our marketing plan was to roll out a series of 90-minute workshops with the rest of the organization, 20 to 30 people at a time, to take them through a journey, a very similar journey, but truncated, abridged, to understand why we ended up where they were, and then have them think about that solution through their own role and how they might bring it to life. And that worked really well. Then, and that took some time, but I didn't need the whole executive team part of that. I did that, I think, with our chief strategy officer at the time. We kind of tag teamed it and one by one went through and did this. And then it just caught fire. Now the group is coming up with their own ways of weaving it into things and what might that mean? And the whole idea got stronger as we did that. But we knew, and this is the sort of thing, like during the executive workshop, it's like, okay, so we're going to do these, not just, okay, well, think about that later. When are we going to do them? Let's book them now. Let's send out the invitations. Let's figure out who's coming to what. What does the structure of that workshop look like? Like we figured all that stuff out. And then we're already locked in after that. Now it was just a matter of showing up in the calendar, told me to show up after that, and everything else took care of itself. That kind of thing goes a long way. Is there going to be an all company meeting that we use? Do we want to create videos around that? Because we could script those videos. You could shoot those videos as part of the workshop if you want. Like, get it done is what we want to be able to accomplish in that last part, because now nothing is left to chance, because we know life is going to get crazy as soon as we leave the bubble of this workshop. And we're already in this mode where we're both excited, but we're also thinking creatively about solutions. So we now just start thinking about creatively about how we get the rest of the group aligned. What is the pushback? What are the fears going to be? What are all that? And it's just a different way of solving that same problem, that when we solve that, everybody else, all the other dominoes fall down.
I really like that, Tim, because when you told me, yeah, but then when we leave the workshop with the exec, we need to make sure that the operational team, the middle managers, are going to do the work. And the magic of the workshop is that you're going to create ownership, because they were there like by understanding what is the MVC and then coming up with the IDs. Yeah. And of course, they are excited because they were the one coming up with them. But the others, they were not. And the fact that okay, guys, we've worked on this, we came up with that, and then you include them in the process to like almost translate them to their own realities, I think is really powerful. So this is what
you also do. There's a lot of ways to do that. Like, you can just do that via storytelling if you're good at it, right? People who are really good at it could simply tell a story. Gary Vaynerchuk, for instance, if you know who he is, like big social media guru, he's also in the advertising world. And he's just gifted at that kind of thing. He probably has 15 ideas a day of something his business is going to go. And he is gifted at being able to then simply record a video where he explains his thinking and why it's important and why it's going to work. And then he could probably just send that video out in the whole group. I'm probably oversimplifying how it works, but he's gifted that way. Not every leader is. That might not be their way of solving the problem. But like, an interesting element to the workshop of the alignment plan is kind of it's basically what I like to call the one slide to rule them all, right? Which is that if you come up with a single slide that explains why we're doing this, it's almost like if everybody had that one slide, it could be a PDF or whatever, and everybody just put that on their wall. All they have to do is look at that and go, yes, that's our North Star. I know why we're doing this now. And it should be compelling emotionally, compelling from an ecosystem way, and compelling monetarily, right? Like, everybody would lock in step if they all knew they were going to get a 20% bonus if they hit this, right? Like, sometimes you can just solve the problem with money if that's going to work at the end of the day. But there also just needs to be this emotional connection to it that then lets people go out and solve that and not let it drop, not let it become something that doesn't happen because I've already got 18 things that are less important, but they're on my calendar, so I do them. And it's so easy to fall into that habit if we don't solve it the right way. But hopefully you can see why these three things together work. They're really, really strong. Like, they help us motivate it. We properly solve that problem. We dedicate enough time with the right people in the room, the right manpower, the right thing. And then we understand how to then get alignment across the board. And sometimes, by the way, that it works both top down and bottom up. Sometimes we have to convince higher up people that weren't in the room about this as well. Like, that's why it really is a marketing campaign. It is about convincing people that this is the answer at the end of the day. But we're good at that. We know how to do that especially as facilitators. If we are facilitators who understand learning outcomes as well, like a lot of the work I did with Hyper Island, we have learning outcomes. We're not trying to come up with a decision at the end of the day. We're trying to change people's mindsets so they believe this and they understand this at the end. Well, if whatever this was something that the leadership team just decided, now we're creating a different sort of workshop where the team doesn't need to make a decision, but we need them to learn or arrive at the same destination. Now it's a learning workshop. and it has learning outcomes. And great facilitators are great at delivering on learning outcomes already. So it's just a different type of process that we take people through.
Of course, I'm a facilitation geek, so now I want to go with the question. Like, I love the idea that you give them the space to execute, like in your alignment plan. You told me, like they actually like send the emails, they do the stuff. How far it can go in terms of what can they produce during that moment?
It really depends on how much time you have for that. So I use percentages because I think it's an easier way to adjust it. So if we talk about 20% of the time is figuring out the MVC, 40% of the time is solving it, 40% of the optimally thinking it and coming to a decision, and then 40% of the time is on the alignment plan. I think it depends on how big that goal is, but if it's substantial enough, the best way is to almost think that you've got an offsite or a retreat where the leadership team is doing this for a week. That's ideal. Not easy to get, but there's also a lot of leadership teams that will take a 5-day retreat and bring the leadership team someplace and do this. And I think they spend too much time doing escape rooms and stuff in the interest of team building. Whereas if they solve this problem, that team will be built. Like that team is, instead of trying to figure out how we're going to escape this room, let's figure out how we're going to double our profit margins over the next year. It works the same way, because when I do this, the workshop is fun. Like it should be fun, but it's not fun because we did an escape room. And I love escape rooms. Escape rooms are fun, but it's wasted time if what we want this to do is be the biggest bang for our buck.
Yeah.
There are ways to do that and make it about the work itself. So to get to your answer of how long do we really need, or how much can we accomplish on this? It depends how much time they're willing to give us. If we have 2 days to do this, you can get quite far if we create a facilitated experience. One of my favorite workshops, and I do this again, I do it in an hour, is we write a book collectively in an hour. And it's a structured workshop where we write a book. And that book becomes a leave behind that the group can have. If you give the context, all then I need is for everybody to go sweat their part of the details of what goes into the book, and then the book can go to everybody else. And if we focus that book on convincing them why this is important, all we as the facilitator have to do is create the structure by which their genius goes into it. You can accomplish a lot in a little bit. And one of the reasons that book approach works is the design and the format and the structure, all of that is done beforehand. You can do the same thing with a video. I can do the same thing with a follow-up workshop. I can do the same thing with all the different marketing elements.
Yeah.
I know what we need to have. Which of this library do we want to pick from?
Cool.
And now we're going to go do those. And we might also split up the group. I might have 3 people work on the workshop version, and 3 people work on a video, and 3 people work on something else. There's lots of ways to split that. It depends on your group and how much time you have and all that. The goal is to have as little to do later as possible, right? Because we could, if we've designed this well, simply bring in, we could have a studio built in the back of the room where I've got my videographer and I've got the mics and the lighting's all there. And we just bring people back. We go literally record the script we have, send it off to the editor. The editor doesn't have to be in the room. It's done, right? Like that is done as part of the workshop. And I think that's where it gets fun and powerful, but you have to have those resources and to be able to do it that way, but it works.
Yeah. And it's a powerful moment. Like, hey guys, you started the workshop. We had no clue on how to tackle this MVC. We have a strong marketing plan that has been filmed and edited and it's ready to be sent to the team.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa.
And imagine it was like that. The MVC was, because it was this for some of us, is like, what does this company stand for? That might be the most valuable challenge that we have, because you might not be able to double revenue if we don't know what we stand for. Like, if we have no way of winning new
Mm.
business because we're too commoditized, then I'm not going to be able to double revenue. So it might be that is the most valuable challenge. And imagine that that's what it is, and that over the course of this alignment plan, we already have a sense of how this is going to live on the website, and we've already recorded videos that go in and all that. And now we get it to the UX team or whoever's going to go build it out, but they already have all these elements. Like, they don't have to come back and guess at what those elements are. Like, it's there. So they have the raw materials to go make the thing, but we've built as much as possible into it already. And I mean, if you really wanted to do it, you could bring them in and literally we could workshop the UX together. Like, as facilitators, we know the value of facilitation and how fast we can make this stuff happen when you get the right people in the room. It's just about planning for that in advance.
Okay. Also something like you said, like, oh, the optimal day is 5 days. Now I was like, okay, now I get it. Because when I was looking at your time, and it really makes sense. Like, I love the example you give. Like, we spend 1 hour to working on the stuff that matters the most, making sure that things get done.
Right.
So it makes sense to spend more time. But like, if you're working on a very high challenge that is complex, that is like big ambition, and you're only working 40% of a day, like, it seems like not feasible in that proportion.
You'd have to. I think you could do it in the context of a 1-day workshop if you do the same 20, 40, 40 sort of thing, but you just have, everything has to shrink in terms of like, how big of a challenge are we really solving in 1 day? But this is mechanically leveraged time, meaning that the more you put in, the more you get out of the back end. So do we want it to be 1 day and we get a decent response, or would we rather be 2 days or 5 days and we get tremendous value out of the back end? This is the pushback we have to make to clients whose mindset is, well, we don't have time to do that. So you don't have time to solve this giant challenge so it isn't that important to you to solve it. Because something I said, it's probably still in my LinkedIn bio and stuff, but basically we help people solve things in a matter of hours versus months. And I say hours, it doesn't mean 2 hours, but like 5 days at 8 hours per day is 40 hours. So we solve this in 40 hours versus letting this problem drag out for the next 2 or 3 years, probably not actually getting solved, burning through tons of man hours and stuff like that, because this group is thinking about it, this group, and then we have a meeting and it's wrong. And so we reconnect later on. All of that, it isn't just draining man hours, it's draining emotionally. It crushes our souls in terms of like wanting to come to work and solve this, because it's just adding to the problem. If we can just solve that by taking those 5 days, and I know that feels like a lot, but it really isn't. It is 1 week. And I'm not even saying I get people to do it that often, but as I do these more and more, the more I just have a natural pipeline for this particular offer, the more 5 days is just going to be what we do. Because and look at the design sprint. The design sprint is a 5-day process. I don't think everybody needs to be in it. Like, it's a 5-day process that doesn't require all 8 hours every single day, but it does require that amount of time to get from the end to the beginning. You couldn't go do a design sprint and be like, yeah, we're not really available except for, the team can only dedicate 4 hours to this. Well, don't expect it to work the same way. It just won't. The process is what the process is. And it is leveraging some of the most valuable people within the company, but at a multiplier that makes the whole thing worth it. And by the way, for us as facilitators, the whole point is then we can charge more money for it. Right? I mean, my joke, this is the joke that I like to use, is we go through this valuation and we come up with the number of what we think it's worth. And so let's go back to my example earlier. Okay, this is worth $30 million if we can solve it. And let's imagine that we only solve it at 20%, so it's $6 million. The good news is I only charge half of that. So this is such a win, right? because of course I don't charge $3 million, but I could charge $300,000 now, and it should seem like a steal. And I still don't charge that much money, right? But you could, in theory, be charging $300,000 to guide people through this and that time, that week, and it should be a steal because it will make the company that much money. That's at least the argument we want to make, because when we deliver that much value out of it, it is worthy of us charging elevated rates. And if we can do that, it's win-win across the board, right? Like everybody comes out of this massively ahead. And I think that's, at the end of the day, that's why I call it a high ROI workshop. That's what we want to be able to deliver. And it works as long as the client's willing to do it. And if they're not the right client. They're a client we're going to fail with, and they will pay us less. We will not be successful with the outcome. And that's going to be a downward spiral. We start devaluing our services. They start devaluing our services. We don't roll it forward, all of that kind of stuff. So what I love is being in a place where even if we spent 5 full days and charged a lot of money and spent a lot of time, that even massive failure still looks really successful. That's the best. That's the best win.
Yeah, I love that. And also at the end is like saying no to what the client is asking for you, or like just saying like, I cannot deliver this in the conditions you're giving me. It shows your professionalism. It shows that you've done it before.
Yeah.
And it gives you even more credits. So
and it's not easy to do. It's not easy to go out and do that. We want to say yes to our clients. We're people pleasers. Of course. We love making people happy. But I would much rather make them happy and rich, I guess, than it really doesn't make them happy. And it's kind of like with kids, you want to make them happy and you want to buy them the cotton candy, but you know they're going to have a stomachache later on. Well, then that didn't actually make them happy, did it? That's a good metaphor. I got to use that.
Yeah,
my cotton
and
candy
you're gonna pay the price
now.
as parent as well at the end of the day. So
yeah, I'm writing that one down. Look out for the LinkedIn post about the cotton candy metaphor coming soon.
Yeah, you should. There was a couple of ones. I will send it to you. Tim, before I let you go, because first, brilliant concept, I think, from marketing perspective, but also like the intelligence behind it. Now, there is one thing that I want to tackle with you is this MVC. Like, in my experience, when you work on a very complex and big challenge, yeah, it's very hard. There is a lot of variables. There is this complexity which could be overwhelming. So you need the right process to tackle that. It takes time, like without giving you every pieces of activities you do. But how do you make sure that you get to something that will land? Because like, those workshops, like you done the thing and you look at the sticky notes, it's like, oh no, they didn't get it. I often see a link between like the complexity of the challenge and the time you allocated to that. So yeah, what's your view on this?
That's a great question. So the bigger the challenge is, the more complex likely the solution is going to be able to do it. I think that is both true and not true at the same time. To weave through some of the other things that we've talked about, I believe that creativity is value multiplier unlike anything else in the world. When you come up with a creative idea or creative solution to something, that unlocks things that are otherwise not possible. And I've seen that be true over and over and over and over. A great idea, most businesses are built on a great idea, not the complexity required to deliver. Like the complexity required to deliver comes later. But at some point, somebody out there had the idea to create Uber, right? To create ride sharing, an app that connects the drivers and the riders and has a rating system so that you can trust the system. They know where you're at, and it's cheaper than a taxi cab. And that's the idea. All the complexity required, and there is complexity required to deliver on that, right? But the idea is the idea. Once you're bought in, the complexity gets solved by the team as you go. That idea, in the context of a workshop, it probably didn't come up in a workshop, but let's pretend it did. Once we see that and we go, that's it. We all see it. We all share the vision now. The complexity will work itself out because complexity is complex. It can't be solved in a workshop. You have to discard that. But the power of unlocking the approach we're going to use is powerful. And I don't believe that any giant problem is going to be solved. If we wanted to solve a giant problem, like for you and I, if we want to solve a giant problem, like how could we make 5 times as much money as we make right now? We're not going to solve that by kind of optimizing all the stuff we're doing already. We're going to solve that by reimagining some completely different future and then aiming for that. I think the best solutions are going to be creative solutions that blow open the approach that we go to next. And my belief is that those ideas are usually simpler in nature. The execution of them, of course, might be complex in nature, but the team exists already. And if the team is aligned, they will go figure that out because that's why the team exists. They will sweat the details of that we couldn't figure out in this meeting. Like we came up with the idea, like that idea exists. Now the team needs to go figure out how to solve that.
To do it.
And they will hit roadblocks and they will hit things, they will hit legal regulations and all that stuff. If we start to let those things get in the way of the solution early on, well, we're discounting the ability of our team to solve it, for one. And we're also it's like we're just making excuses. So I think any success story that you can point to, any success story starts with that vision and creativity. And sometimes that vision and creativity might be a system, by the way. Like it might be, what makes this work is the logistics, right? Is the complex logistics. Like we've solved that. I think of FedEx, for instance. Like FedEx, it's like a business case study people use forever, that they said the vision is we're going to deliver it overnight. And a million people would tell you that's impossible to do when they figured out the logistics of it. It's a logistics solution, but it still ultimately was the vision, and they just solved it. So that was my long rambling way of getting to it's still ultimately about the clear creative solution and vision that then needs the robustness of execution later on. But that's what the team does once you have the alignment plan. Of course, that's there. We cannot solve the complexity in the room for anything worth doing. Nothing. You and I could spend half an hour and we could figure out a positioning for our respective companies of what we stand for. But how to then go activate that in a content marketing plan across 5 different social media channels, that will be complex by its very nature. Does that mean we can't do it? No, but we can't do it if we don't have the vision. So you figure out the vision first and the complexity gets solved later. I'm sure I could come up with a better way of answering that than I just did, but that's
that's what's great. And I think that there is 2 ways of looking at it, right, Tim? Like when you were talking about Uber, like the brilliant idea they had. In my mind, if there was a workshop, like they break down like all the issues with taxi, and this is also because I'm a UX designer at heart. So it's like, okay, like let's look at the price. We have no visibility on how much it will cost. We cannot know where they will be available. And then if you look at that angle, and then they have all those issues based on those categories, it's like, okay, now let's find a way to solve all of them. It's because you break down the complexity that you allow the team to come up with this brilliant concept.
Exactly.
But of course, like you said, there is the other way, like the innovative company, like where we close our eyes, this is the Apple way. Like we need a device that is super simple to interact with other human and reinvent the phone. And this is the vision. And then, hey guys, you figure it out how to do that.
It makes me think of the cautionary tale of Theranos, right? If you've read or seen the story about Theranos is a company that the vision was, instead of a whole blood test, you just get one drop of
I have
blood, and
seen
it
it.
would do all these tests and stuff like that. If you watch any of the movies or listen to the podcast or read the book, and I think I've done all three of that story.
It's the scam company, right?
Yeah, ultimately the problem is she was selling it as if it existed, and they had not actually solved it yet.
I remember.
That
I've seen the
said,
show. Yeah.
despite the fact that it turned out to be actually impossible, the problem but what they had was a clarity of vision, and all these really smart people going about trying to solve the problem. And they had a product market fit. They had people that wanted to buy it. They had great engineers trying to solve the problem. I think ultimately the problem was one of ethics. They were selling something and saying it solved the problem when it did not, in fact, doing that, versus the Netflix approach, which is Netflix was called Netflix, not DVDs by mail. When they formed the company, they had this vision that someday you would be streaming these things, but the technology did not yet exist to do it. So they created a version where you could go online and get the movie and it would be mailed to you. And then as soon as they saw the possibility of streaming it, they moved into streaming. And they've always known where they were going by having that vision, but they didn't they didn't pretend you could do it and then just create a bad user experience the whole time, right? And I think that was the problem with Theranos, is they had this failure of ethics in that I'm sure they had a bunch of great solutions that they developed trying to aim for that. And I think that's why I say the goal is even 80% failure should still be really good. In that case, they weren't, the founder was not willing to accept 80% failure. They were only willing to accept 100% success, which turned out to be, at least by every technology we have today, impossible. So who knows, in 20 years, somebody might crack that. And I think that's what they were aiming for, but they did not crack it in the window that they had funding available for. I take away the cautionary tale, but for me, it was also insightful of just think about that. When Steve Jobs has a vision for what I want a music player that has the MP3s, but I want it to be able to have 10,000 songs in it, because I had one of those early MP3 players that could play 9 songs. No joke. It had capacity for 9 songs. I could not even get a full album on there without degrading the quality to a point where I didn't like it anymore. It's like, well, what's the point of that? So that's technologically achievable right now, but pointless. And then when the iPod came out, and then he gets his people on and they go solve amazing things. And I'm going to guess there's probably millions of problems they didn't solve along the way, but they have that vision and then let the team go chase it. We just want to bring that level of thinking and value to all kinds of problems. And I don't know, just to put a bow on it, that's what I think when I get excited about facilitation. That's what we can do, is we can help teams do that and transcend the BS that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And that's a pretty powerful, amazing thing to be a part of.
Okay, I think this is a very nice way to end the podcast. I think like you have the focus thanks to your workshop, you have this bold vision, you have the plan to make it happen. So it's like you give the team everything they needed to actually solve it from their own way, in their own, I would say, scope. So I think it's a very powerful one, Tim. Thank you very much for being on the podcast. It was amazing. I've learned a bunch. Where can people find you?
Great question. So the easiest place to start maybe is my main website, which is letslightbulb.com. So LETSLIGHTBULB.com. Let's Lightbulb. No apostrophe. There's no apostrophe in the let's in the URL, because that breaks the URL. That's my main website. And so you can find almost everything else from there. Specifically around the high ROI workshops, it's actually the same, that URL, high-ROI-workshops.com, is where we recently ran a webinar around this. It's where future trainings will be, because I'm building out right now, because there's been a lot of interest in it, a more robust certification training on the process. And but it's also for any companies out there interested in that kind of thing. That's a great place to go. And I share a lot on LinkedIn, which we referenced earlier. So find me on LinkedIn, Tim Leake, Leake. If you just search that, that's probably the easiest way to find me there.
I will put everything in the show notes. Thanks a lot,
Awesome.
Tim. It
That's
was
even
a
better.
blast.
Just look at the show notes.
Definitely. Okay, super
Thanks
cool.
again for having me. This has been awesome, Mehdi. This is great. Thank you.
I loved it, Tim. So, guys, I hope you will enjoy the episode as much as I did. We see each other very soon. Have a lovely day, evening, whatever you're listening to this pod. Bye-bye.